What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
Guys, thanks so much for being here today. We got a great episode coming your way. Quillian Salkilld stole the show this past weekend. We're going to recap that and talk about what's next, as well as some of the other stuff on the card. We got a little UFC 330 to talk about, how ticket sales aren't really what they had hoped for. And of course, at the end of the episode, I am going to give you guys my recap and thoughts on my first ever commentary experience that I had cageside with Ragin FC this past weekend. It was a lot of fun, and I can't wait to tell you guys all about it. Everything in the timestamps below. If you're looking for a particular conversation, you'll know where it is. Nick, let's start with Quillian Salkilld.
Let's do it.
Mateusz Gamrot. I mean, so when you think about Mateusz Gamrot, right, dismantled Esteban Ribovic in his most recent outing, has a win against Arman Sarukian on his record, Rafael dos Anjos. I mean, the list kind of goes on. And there was a time where a lot of people thought that Mateusz Gamrot was actually going to be contending for a belt, and he was looking like he was good enough to make a championship run. Lost a couple and won a couple, and never really made it to the pinnacle that we thought he would. But make no mistake, that doesn't mean that he's not a great fighter and still extremely dangerous and a real litmus test. I mean, we saw what he did with Ribovic, right? Yeah. Like, everybody was very high on Esteban Ribovic as being this young prospect that's kind of taken the world by storm, and Mateusz Gamrot was like, not so fast, let me dispose of him.
Right.
Well, he got disposed of last night by Quillian Salkilld. Quillian is really scary for a couple of reasons, right? One, he strikes with a lot of power and really clean accuracy, and he can mix it all up. Good hands, good kicks, good range. But he's actually a grappler at heart, and he said that after the Beneil Dariush fight. He said, look, I actually am a grappler, and I'm glad that I got to showcase some of my grappling skill here tonight, which makes him a scary opponent for most fighters, because when things start to not go so well on the feet, what happens? You usually shoot for a takedown. Well, that's not really a luxury against Quillan.
No, and Quillan Salkilld is exactly what the lightweight division needs right now. He is so exciting to watch. I mean, the first round finishes are just piling up for him, and I agree with you. Of course, he's great on the feet. We've seen the highlight reel KO where he knocked Nasrat Haqparast out cold, one of the most brutal knockouts we saw last year. And people were starting to say, okay, this guy's a great striker, but maybe the good grapplers at 155, which that division has plenty of, may be able to expose him if it goes to the ground. And then we see some great scrambling moments last time he was fighting down in Australia. And then, of course, Mateusz Gamrot is maybe one of the best grapplers the lightweight division's ever seen. Now, he's not who he used to be, but he's still a very good fighter and a tough night for anybody in the division, especially those guys trying to jump into the top 10, top 5. And so Quillian had a tough match on the docket, but he made it look easy, forced Gamrot to try to get right into grappling very early in the fight. And that's sort of where it all started to go wrong. Now, I won't, just throw shade towards Gamrot, because he had a pretty good submission attempt in that heel hook. It looked like for a second Quillian's leg was in a very compromised position, but his composure on the ground is what I admire the most about him. He doesn't seem to get worked up by the moment, and he looks pretty cool, calm, and collected on the feet, but that translates over to the ground as well. And when you can stay relaxed against a guy like Gamrot, who has you what looks like dead to rights in a submission, and then work your way out of it, and then ultimately wind up in the dominant position, and then everybody knows how it goes from there. He ends up getting a submission over a great grappler. It just speaks to the composure of the young man. So I can't wait to see what Quillian does next. I think that the submission, we've heard Chael Sonnen say it many times, like a rear naked choke is the most high percentage submission that you can find on the UFC on any given night. But most of the time it's a little bit of a conceding, like, I'm done here, let's just get this thing over with, get to the back and collect our checks. This wasn't one of those situations. Quillian was waiting for the right moment to cinch in that rear naked choke position, and he did it perfectly. When you learn how to do a rear naked choke, it's like the first thing even people who don't do jiu-jitsu learn. It's like, how do you choke somebody, and here's how you kind of position your hands. But there were a couple subtleties that he added to it, which I thought were really impressive. Putting his chin on his own hand to sort of lock in and reinforce the position. Very high level. Mateusz knows how to defend it, and he was looking for something to grip behind his head just so he could maybe try to pry that hand off and then get to the choking arm, which is the more important one to get rid of. But Quillan left no space whatsoever for him to reach back there and get it. So I have to give him a lot of credit. And they were talking about what's next for him. He doesn't really have a particular person in mind. All he wants is a particular spot, which is something in the top 10 ranks. And I think after last night, he's going to for sure be be somewhere in the top 10, maybe number 8 or 9, and he's looking towards the top 5. He said, I fought a tough guy right here. I want to move. I'm looking to move up the division, not fight somebody behind me. I think he's marketable. He's great on the microphone. He's got a cool haircut. He wears the mustache, all that stuff. So I think there's a real high potential for Quillian to climb the ranks in this division, but it's going to be interesting to see who they pair him up against, because after last night, people are already comparing him to a BSD and how that might be a fun fight. The loser, which is kind of weird because BSD also lost his last fight, but the loser of Arman versus Rufi, which I find to be very compelling as well. So I know winners fight winners and losers fight losers for the most part, but Quillian's in this weird situation at the lightweight division where there aren't a whole lot of winners above him, so he might have to fight a loser in his next fight. But if they're up in the rankings past him, then I think he'd be willing to take it.
Well, yeah, I mean, pretty much all the winners are looking at either title shots or number one contender shots. So it's kind of sometimes when you try to crack into that top 5, you do end up facing somebody even coming off a win who is not coming off a win, who's coming off a loss,
right?
Which could be the case. And I think a lot of people are talking about BSD, which would be a very fun matchup. And then the loser, as you said, of Arman versus Rufi. Either one, because we know pretty much the winner of Arman versus Rufi is fighting for a title. We all thought Arman was fighting for a title before the Rufi thing got booked, and we know that Nascimento's passing had a lot to do with now Charles Oliveira not fighting Sarukian. So there's some moving parts there, and certainly understandable on Charles's part. But you said something that was great. I think you summed it up in one word, which is composure. I mean, when you're a 26-year-old young man that's being flown in from more than halfway across the world on the other side of the planet to main event against a guy who's beaten Arman Sarukian and a very good fighter, a fight where the odds reflected it being 50-50 all the way down to the wire, and you show up with that type of composure, you do get into a compromising position for a moment there. Now, it didn't really look like Gamrot had a heel hook completely dead to rights or a knee bar completely dead to rights, but he was working towards it, and Quillian used a very good defensive posturing and sat himself up, got his knee, past the danger line, as we call it, and got himself out of there. But what I was most impressed with was how he transitioned so well, because, he could have easily just gone back to the feet and, okay, I had some success here. I hurt Mateusz right out of the gate. I want to keep piling it on him. I'm going to keep this thing standing. But no, he got back to his feet for a moment. There was a couple strikes, and then he shot a takedown of his own. Landed a beautiful double, locked the legs down, and then Mateusz Gamrot, he's like trying to hold a shark down, while there's still got tons of energy. And so he's doing all the right things. He's transitioning, he's moving. But Salkilld did a really good job of just staying heavy, staying on him, flowing with him. And then ultimately he was looking for that choke. And when he fit it in, it fit like a glove. I mean, it was totally game over, Yahtzee game set match for Quillian Salkilld. He had Mateusz Gamrot dead to rights at that point.
And to that point, he also said, a lot of people see me as a striker, and I get that. I've had some good performances in the UFC so far, heavy with my striking, but I'm not going to limit myself and try to stay on the feet with somebody like Gamrot, who is a proven good grappler and sort of leans heavy in the side of being better on the ground than better on the feet. He was like, no, then that's limiting myself. I believe in my skills both on the feet and on the ground, and it's a little bit cooler. It's not one of those things you want to see if you're a coach. See your guy go out there and try to beat somebody at what they're best at, but there's a competitive nature to that mindset, and I think Quillian actually did a great job bringing the offense to Gamrot, because, I'm going to use a big example, right? Like, imagine if Conor McGregor would have shot in on Khabib. People would be like, what the hell are you doing? And for good reason. Why go down there and give him opportunities? But Quillian believes enough in his skill, and clearly his skills pay the bill on the ground. So I think that him bringing the full gamut of mixed martial arts techniques to Gamrot was actually a really good play. It showed Gamrot like, okay, I guess I'm not just safe on the ground and need to keep working takedowns and stuff like that. And obviously the fight was short-lived. We didn't get a full 5-minute round. And Quillian also came out and said, whether it was in the first minute or the last minute of the first round, I knew somewhere in that first round I was going to get a finish, and I had a feeling it was going to be a submission, probably because he knew Gamrot was going to try to push the grappling and there would be some sort of opening off a shot or some sort of scramble. And I guess he's just crafty that way. He's a long body for 155. I do think that, Darce's, Anaconda's, things like that will be really beneficial to him as he moves up in the ranks. But the rear naked choke, as classic as it gets, is a submission, and he nailed it. Picture perfect, clean right from the start of the fight to the end. He's the man of the night.
Yeah, no question about it. And the more I think about it, I really do like the BSD fight because it times perfectly. And even though BSD is coming off of a big loss, fortunately for BSD, he didn't take any damage. He just got caught in a sub.
Yeah.
And the same can be said for Salkilld. He just got in there and made quick work of Gamrot without taking much damage. So you have two guys that are on, somewhat of a similar schedule that both could theoretically get back in there before the end of the year. I know BSD is going to want to get one back because he was on a 4-fight streak, really starting to make momentum towards that #1 contendership again, and then Patty completely derailed it. Salkilld is the opposite. He's on a hot 4-fight finish streak, all first round as well. And the UFC, one thing we know about the UFC, if you're 26 years old, you're good on the mic, and you finish people in the first round, both with knockouts and submissions, you get what you want, kind of.
Yeah.
And if he wants a top 5 guy, a guy who's ahead of him in the rankings, he's going to get it. And BSD may be the perfect guy for him.
Yeah, Quillian Salkilld versus BSD at MSG sounds pretty good to me, and that's exactly what Quillian wants. He said he wants to go fight at the home of all things combat sports and really entertainment.
Where the Barnhill Brothers studio?
Yeah, exactly. Not quite, but MSG, where Kill Tony happened this past weekend. 2 nights sold out. So I'd love to see that. I think it's a great opportunity. BSD needs to get himself back in the win column, but that's a very tough fight for him. The only thing I'll say about Quillian that I hope maybe he reconsiders is he got the $100K bonus. He got whatever he was paid to show up. And then I think, finish bonus also gets $25K. So he's going to leave with a pocket full of change, but he said he's going to spend every dollar. So maybe don't do that, but if that's the way you live, then to each their own.
Yeah, well, that's been a story that fighters have told for many generations.
Tale as old as time.
I hope that Quillian Salkilld doesn't go down that road, but he's still got plenty of time and a lot of fight left in him to earn a lot of money, and I think his earning potential is high. I want to talk about one other fighter on the card, personal friend of ours, friend of the channel, Yadier Del Valle. Yep. Doing it for his late coach, Ulpiano Machalis. I was thinking submission just because that would be poetic. Ulpiano was, the legendary Gracie Baja black belt, built many IBJJF world champions, unfortunately passed away a couple of months back. He was Yadi's first coach here in Houston, but he got it done with a brilliant knockout nonetheless. Super quick, 35 seconds, I think. Darren the Damage Elkins was the one that was on the receiving end of the damage. Yeah. But 42 years old, father time gets to everybody. And we've been saying this for a long time. Yadier Del Valle has not really had his opportunity to shine. Right. And some of that has been, okay, the Monkey King fight wasn't his best performance, but then you have the Isaac Dolgarian thing. And, say what you will, Isaac Dolgarian doing something he shouldn't have done. It kind of looks like that's the case. Yadi was unaware of that. He was just going in the cage to fight. It was unbeknownst to him. Right. So I feel like, for a young man who was so hyped to get into the UFC, finished a lot of people to get there, and now has his opportunity, it kind of felt, weird and clunky the first few fights. And now I think the world is going to see the fighter that we know in Yadier Del Valle, which is an absolute lights out finisher, be it submission or, as we saw last night, devastating knockout. Yeah,
Yadier Del Valle, his a UFC career has officially begun, right? The first little bit were almost like some scratches, like the Jordan Levitt thing. Obviously, Jordan had a pretty crazy game plan, jumping on one foot to get over there and basically inviting Yadi to grab his leg. The Isaac Dolgarian disaster that happened, and who knows what all is going to end up coming from that. But Yadi had his hands clean in that situation and was paid his money. I don't think Dolgarian was actually paid for that.
And I think that's worth noting. I don't mean to interrupt you. One guy's still in the UFC and winning fights and was paid his money for that fight, and the other guy was not paid his money and is no longer in the UFC. And I think that dispels a lot of the BS that we saw around that fight.
Yeah, and in a feature bout nonetheless. So, Yadier is one of my good friends. I was sparring with him last week. We get a lot of rounds together. He's such a beast. He's so strong everywhere. His grappling is insane. I'm black belt in jiu-jitsu, black belt in judo. The striking is very impressive, and he's got heavy hands. So there's actually times where I'll be sparring with him and getting some rounds in and stuff, and I love to keep it on the feet. My best chances at having a decent round against Yadi are on the feet, but sometimes his hands start landing so heavy, and I'm like, all right, I better shoot and shoot my shot and see how I can do in the grappling realm. And he's so good in that snap down position. Sometimes he'll find submissions from there, and being on the mats with him on a daily basis, I do see him catch so many people in submission, variations from there. You shoot in on him because you're tired of getting punched by him, and you wind up getting choked out. Now, Darren was, trying to figure out a way to escape that headlock, that snap down position. He did get out, but he didn't leave that. He didn't get a clean break. He got hit right off the break, and that's what sort of opened up the beginning of the end. All it took was one massive left hand. I won't say a straight because it did kind of come as if it was like a backside hook.
Yeah, it was kind of a hook, wasn't it?
It was a beautiful shot right behind the guard of Darren Elkins, and I know Darren isn't who he used to be. He's taken a whole lot of damage in his day, but to land a shot like that and have single shot KO power at 145 speaks to the volume of Yadi's power. I really do think that he's going to have a great career moving forward. He was in the feature bout, so a lot of eyes were on him. By the way, the UFC Meta Apex was packed to the brim. That was the busiest I've ever seen it because I think they've officially filled out all the seats that they were going to put in there. So I'm glad that they got to fight in a bigger crowd than they usually get at the Apex. But I hope Yadi's next fight is in front of a sold-out arena or maybe on a numbered event because he's must-see TV. He's so exciting. The power's real. The submission threats are very real. And no matter who you give him next, they're going to have their hands full with Yadi, the Cuban problem.
There we go. A Cuban problem he is for sure. And congratulations to him, friend of the channel. We always like to see our training partners and friends do well. And Darren the Damage Elkins, Yadi said it in his post-fight interview, this guy's a legend. I mean, what's dozens of fights in the UFC? I've lost count. 42 years old. Yeah. Been doing the damn thing for a long time. Promised his wife he would not retire the soft retiring that a lot of UFC guys do, which is to go to bare knuckle. He said, no, I'm done. I'm done. And he goes, I've taken some damage in the UFC, and literally his fight name is The Damage. It's, if you didn't know, it's tattooed across his chest. He's like, can you imagine with the wars that I get myself into in the UFC if I went to bare knuckle? I know that's the route a lot of retiring guys take. They say I'm retired, but all that really means is I'm taking the gloves off and I'm not doing grappling anymore. I'm going to BKFC. But that is not going to be the case for Darren the Damage Elkins. He's got a wealth of knowledge. Maybe he can train. Maybe he can coach. Maybe he can open a gym. Maybe he can sit down and do what we do and talk fights.
Yeah, I would assume he'll be a great coach, and not just for the technical side of things. Of course, Darren Elkins comes from a past generation, so he isn't quite as evolved as like a Yadier Del Valle, right? The guys who have watched Darren Elkins' generation and learn from these guys and these legends that have come up from the sport and made the sport what it is. But I think as far as like the mental side of being a fighter, Darren Elkins is the kind of guy you would want in your corner if you need, a little bit of help in the weight cut situation, or if you need a little bit of help on fight week to just stay mentally tough. Darren Elkins is as tough as they come. So tough night for him, but I'm really happy for my teammate and good friend Yadi. So I can't wait to see what's next. And hopefully Darren Elkins has a great retirement.
Heck yeah. So let's move into UFC 330. I mean, there's few main events that I'm more excited about than Islam Makhachev versus Ian Machado. Gary,
great fight. I
can't wait for it. But if I'm being honest, right, the rest of the card is not great.
And there's another title fight on the card, right?
Yeah.
So I get that, like, it's top heavy, and I don't want to exclude the females, Mackenzie Dern and Gillian Robertson, from being added into the consideration for top heavy. But after that, the feature bout on, it kind of falls off in a big way. And I don't know what they're thinking, because we just saw Conor McGregor come back. And if there's anybody in the sport that doesn't need help selling a fight, or they could afford to make it a top heavy event, it'd be Conor McGregor. But they had Paddy the Baddy as the co-main event in that situation. So they really loaded the guns for that. And the situation here for UFC 330, I don't know if it's because fights fell apart. Joe Pyfer should have been on that card. And I think Caio Bahallo, who he's supposed to fight, that one being the feature bout, really could have made this thing feel a little bit better.
Sean Brady. I mean, they could have, that area of the world, the Northeast, there's a lot of people. I'm just kind of confused by the card as a whole, man, because there's a lot of people they could have put on it that they didn't. And
there's a lot of virtually no names on the card. And I mean no disrespect, but as far as the casuals are concerned, like we know who most of the people on the card are, and we follow the sport very closely, but a lot of people have never heard of these names. And Islam Makhachev is a star, an international star. Everybody knows him. So people are going to tune in. But I just feel like the reason the ticket sales aren't near what they should be, and Dana White always comes out at the post-fight press conferences and tells us this is, record setting, and we sold the most, it was sold out event, yada, yada, yada. Every time he does an arena, that's the case. This one apparently is not sold out all the way. So I get it, because Islam and Ian, while it's a very interesting fight for us, and I don't think it's as easy to predict as, say, some of the markets are predicting, I do think that people go, oh, I know Islam. I know he's going to win. He's going to do it by grappling. I'm not as interested in that. And then the rest of the card sort of suffers. So people aren't looking at it as like one of those just can't miss type of events, even if it is in your back door in Philadelphia. So I don't know what the UFC is going to do. It doesn't even feel like the card is fully situated yet.
Isn't there only like 9 fights on the card?
Yeah, and obviously Google isn't the best place, but you go to Tapology, you go to SureDog, go to anywhere to find the entire bout list, and it's not as stacked. Usually about 15 fights are on there. I can't find 15 fights on this card, and I certainly can't find 15 meaningful fights. There's a lot of names that most people wouldn't know, so Islam's going to have to, his back's going to be sore from carrying this entire card, but I think the main event and even the co-main event will deliver in a way to show us that 330 is a good card, but not a great card.
Well, and no disrespect to the ladies, right? But it does feel like to me a little bit, because that could end up being a great fight. The whole card could end up being the best card of the year. I mean, how often do we see, Apex cards where the name recognition is really soft, or, even a fight night on the road. Where
last night.
Exactly. Some great fights, great finishes last night. A lot of first round finishes, Yadier and Quillian, the 2 guys we talked about. But for ticket sales, because that's kind of what we're talking about right now. Right. Doesn't it feel like to some degree the UFC should have flipped the ladies and Benoit versus Patty? Because if you did that, then they're one pay-per-view away from each other, or numbered card as we're calling them now, and you get Conor McGregor, who does, as you said, and Max Holloway both pull big numbers on their own.
Right.
And then the ladies get a chance to shine as the co-main event. And then do Patty versus BSD as the co-main for Islam and Ian. I don't know. I just felt like that would have helped bolster sales for. Conor doesn't need any bolstering, and this would, Patty being on that card would have bolstered. But
I get what you mean there, but at the same time, we needed Patty on Conor's card because that was a handing of the baton. I know Conor McGregor didn't retire, but we didn't get a real fight. So we did get an epic performance out of a mega star in Patty Pimblett, and doing BSD the way he did him in under a minute was so impressive. That fight, most people don't realize this. The Patty versus BSD fight lasted shorter time than the Conor McGregor versus Max Holloway fight, but only by about 10 seconds, but still very insane to think about because that was an actual fight and Conor's fight wasn't.
That's an interesting stat. I figured I never even looked into which fight lasted longer, but there you go.
But I think that, Mackenzie Dern and Gillian Robertson are on a better card because we did need somebody to help us out a little bit at 329. I guess especially in hindsight because Conor didn't actually get to compete really, and Max Holloway either. He was sort of robbed of that. But the girls have an opportunity. I think that the fact that Gillian Robertson is a submission ace is pretty cool. But she's going up against Mackenzie Dern, who is the submission queen as far as jiu-jitsu and MMA is concerned. She's still the best grappler that the sport of mixed martial arts has ever seen in the octagon.
As far as jiu-jitsu submission for the ladies, I would agree with that.
Yeah. So this fight could end up being one of those ones where we see a lot of interesting grappling exchanges, but Gillian Robertson doesn't really offer all that much on the feet. Mackenzie Dern, she's game as hell. She's not the most technical striker in the world, but she's down to throw some heavy hands, and she's not worried about closing distance and getting taken down because she knows that she can reverse or she can find submission opportunities even from a defensive position or with her back on the ground. So that one's going to be interesting, but I do think it's going to lean towards the grappling heavy side of things. And of course, if the favorite in Islam Makhachev beats Ian Gary, a lot of people are assuming that's going to be a grappling heavy event as well. So I'm not willing to say that yet because Islam's striking is getting very good, but I do think that Ian Gary eventually will get taken down, and the main and co-main on 330 may end up being a little bit too grappling heavy for, say, the casual fans.
Yeah, well, Gillian Robertson sitting at about 30% chance to win on Kalshi. Are you saying that she might be a bit of a live dog? Do you think she's got a chance here, or just because her style is similar to that of Mackenzie's, but just not as good, that she's just going to get outworked on the ground?
Yeah, you know how I am. On Kalshi, I like to watch the lines. And if there's somebody who I think is a decent starter and they're the heavy underdog, then I look at them and say, all right, they may be able to make things interesting, especially in a high-profile fight like a title fight.
Move the lines a little bit.
Yeah, move the line. If it can go from 30 to 40, boom, I get my opportunity to get out. Now, I think Mackenzie Dern wins this fight for sure. And I think she does it by submission. I think she's actually going to get Gillian out of there and do to Gillian what Gillian would hope she could do to her. But I just don't see how Gillian has enough ability to strike with power or get enough opportunities on the ground to do ground and pound. And I don't think she's going to submit Mackenzie Dern. But I do think that she's a good enough starter and will make things interesting in such a high profile fight that the line will shift enough for me to at least get in and get out and then go put a little bit extra.
On your merry way.
Put a little bit extra on Mackenzie Dern once the madness at the beginning ends.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair play. For me, it's Mackenzie Dern, all day long because of the style.
Yeah.
And I think with Jason Perillo, she's gotten a lot better, with her striking. She's never going to be a Joanna Jędrzejczyk, right? That's not going to be her style. And, there's just not enough time left in the career to become an elite level striker for Mackenzie Dern, but she doesn't need to be. She's the champion already. Yeah. She needs to use her striking effectively against really good high level strikers to keep herself safe, get those body locks and get her takedowns and do what she does. And I don't think that I think if it was Zhang Wei Li, I'd be a lot more intrigued because stylistically, I think that's very, very interesting because Zhang is very strong and extremely dangerous on the feet.
Yeah.
And, while Mackenzie certainly could submit her if it goes to the ground and she gets top position, that's a difficult proposition when you're trying to come in on a striker who's a lot better than you. But the fight that we have is Gillian Robertson. She's earned her right to be there. She says she's trained her ass off for this fight. I'm excited about it. And guys, by the way, we did a deep dive video. I think it was like almost 47 minutes long of Islam versus Ian. We broke that fight down from every angle you can possibly explore it. We'll put a link to that in the description if you're wondering why our breakdown of that fight is not on this video. That has its own video. It deserved its own video, and you'll find it below. So, my prediction, my final prediction for the main event in UFC 330 is going to be Mackenzie Dern, second round submission of Gillian Robertson. I think it's dicey in the first round, but she finds her takedown in the second. Cooks Robertson, and the champ remains the champ.
Yeah, I think she's going to have a significant advantage once the fight does get situated and on the ground. I don't know who's going to initiate the takedowns. Mackenzie Dern, like I said, is down to throw some strikes, and usually that closes distance, which winds up getting you in a body lock position or a clinch or something like that, and she's pretty good with her judo throws, and I think it'll be interesting for the first round or so, but I do think that once Gillian gets the fight where she wants it, which is on the ground, she's going to realize she's in over her head. She's bit off more than she can chew. Mackenzie Dern is a multi-time world champion as far as in the gi and out of the gi jiu-jitsu is concerned. So I think that she's going to wind up setting a trap, getting Gillian to try to take her down, and then having her right where she wants her. So I do think Mackenzie actually gets a finish here in this title fight.
I agree. And I guess we need to end the episode talking about my past weekend at Ragin FC.
Yeah.
Shout out to you guys at Ragin. Thank you for having me. But man, I got the experience this weekend for the first time in my life to call fights live.
Yeah.
We do this where we break down fights and
Sure.
we talk, explore things from every angle, but not while the fights are actually happening.
And we even do the live streams, right? So it's almost like a precursor to calling fights live ringside or cage side. We watch them here and we call them to the best of our abilities, but that's from the comfort of our studio, and we're watching UFC fights. So for you to go out there into Lake Charles, Louisiana and get your debut, if you will, it was great.
I made my pro debut last night, and thank God it wasn't in the cage. It was just outside of it. But I want to give a shout out to the gentleman, TJ DeSantis, that I did the show with.
Yeah.
He is a lead analyst for many, many years. Very, very professional. I mean, I'm hooked up with the headset. We've got the soundboards. This is the button you use to communicate with the booth in the back. Make sure this is on, otherwise nobody's going to hear you. And then there's certain times where you got to turn it off. And here's the schedule, and there's going to be a commercial here, and then we need you to say something here, but you're going to pre-record something. That was unlike anything I've ever done. And TJ was a true pro, and he's like, let me walk you through this. And, him and I ended up having great chemistry together, and I just called it as I saw it. A lot of the fights that happened were amateur fights. There were 4 professional bouts.
Right.
Some of the belts that were fought for and contested for were amateur belts. There were varying levels of skill, but the main event and co-main event, I was very impressed by some of the skill coming out of the Louisiana and East Texas area. It was a lot of fun, man, and to sit there and do that, and you see these young guys and gals that come in from 3-4 hours drive, and they're arriving the day of weigh-ins. They may be even sleeping in the car. They're shadow boxing in the parking lot.
The nerves are through the roof,
getting ready, and And then in a lot of cases, like fighting and either winning or losing, and, not even getting paid because a lot of it's amateur, licking their wounds, getting back in their car and heading back home to wherever it is that they call home because they can't really even afford to stay a night in the hotel. It kind of brought me back to what this is all about, right? Like, everybody that we know, that we see, that makes big money, that is famous, that has a huge following, that has put on fights that we'll remember for our lifetimes, got started in a place just like that. It's where I got the honor to call fights last night. And you see some kids, and some of them you're like, okay, this guy, this was a bucket list thing. He wanted to get in there and say he got into a cage. He tells kids that he got into a cage fight. And others, it's like, okay, this young man at 22, 23 years old, or this young lady, like at 20 years old, there was one of them, Josie Jones. She was very, very good, 20 years old, great boxing. Fought a girl named Crystal Miller, this also 20, who fought on Fury last weekend, came and immediately fought this weekend. And, the main event was fantastic. Vance Shaw coming with real adversity against a young man named Antonio Hernandez, who Hernandez was supposed to be the guy 0-0, making his pro debut, fighting the hometown guy that's 3-0, all 3 submissions.
Yeah.
Antonio Hernandez gave Vance Shaw everything he could handle and then some, but Vance Shaw stuck in there and grinded out a decision victory. Like, very good skill on display in the bouts that were towards the end of the night. All in all, I had a blast. It was a great experience.
Yeah, and I have to say, the one thing, the saying in mixed martial arts that everybody needs to understand is expect the unexpected, right? Yeah. When you showed up there, the first fight of the night, I was tuned in from the beginning on the live stream, was a kid's fight. 10 years old.
10 versus 12 years old.
And these kids are technical, so I love to see, right? It's a little bit hard maybe if you're newer to the sport and you're not quite as desensitized to all of it and the nature of fighting as we are. But when you watch kids, you're like, man, could this be rough? But then you see the techniques on display and you're like, man, some of these kids are technically better than some of the amateurs who are in their 20s and whatever. So it was kind of cool, but I'm sure you weren't expecting that until you saw the bout list and you go, okay, wait a second, that looks like a real young face. There's no way he could grow any facial hair.
It wasn't even that, it was the weights. And so I'm looking, okay, bantamweight fight,
64
light heavyweight
pounds.
fight, and then I see 84 pounds versus 86 pounds. I'm like, who the heck is this? And so I asked, I was like, what's going on with 84 pounds? And they were like, oh, it's the kids fight. I'm like, and at first I was like, I don't really like that. I don't want to see. And I was like, well, what's the rule set? And they're like, well, they can only punch and kick to the body.
Right.
And they're going to wear shins. And, obviously full grappling is allowed.
Right.
But I was like, okay, that makes me feel better. These kids aren't just ripping each other to the face.
Right.
And it ended up being very competitive. Both of those young men, and I said it on the broadcast, like, it takes some stones as an adult to step inside of a cage and fight somebody in front of a crowd of 400 or 500 people. Yeah. To do that at 10 years old, man, that's unbelievable. Yeah, well,
that's a lot of courage. I love that, MMA is moving so fast, right? Nobody, 20 years ago, there weren't 10-year-olds that could compete at that kind of level, but the game is evolving. And now, we've seen in corners of the world, you go to the Caucasus region and they've been doing Sambo since they were little kids. So there's techniques out the wazoo coming from those parts of the world. And, you go to Thailand, there's kids that are smoking cigarettes and taking Muay Thai fights by the time they're 7 years old. And they're just accustomed to it because it's a part of their culture and their life. In America, we never really had that. Kids go play soccer, they play baseball, basketball, whatever, even football, which could be potentially just as or more dangerous than the rule set that these kids were doing combat sports in. But I think it's interesting to watch the evolution of the game because, like I said, 20 years ago, we didn't have kids that knew what a triangle was as opposed to an arm bar or a darce or anything. And you see these 10-year-olds or whatever age they are now going and giving us really cool techniques. So the game is moving fast. I can't wait to see where mixed martial arts as a whole is in like 20 years. But I also want to say there was one situation in that whole thing, and the fight card was fun. There was a lot of fun fights, but there was one thing that was maybe the first time I've ever seen it, where a guy was in a position where he was getting choked out, but on the feet. So that's a weird place for the referee. And I know that the referee is the one who probably should take the most blame in this situation, but it's difficult, right? Because you would assume if somebody's unconscious that their legs wouldn't be holding them up. And it was like a body triangle situation, obvious rear naked choke, and this kid wanted to fight out of it. But after about 10 seconds of maybe looking for something to grab onto to try to loosen the choke a little bit, he just sort of let his hands go down here. He was still standing up, but he was unconscious. And so it's a weird place for the referee. He's working with milliseconds of time, but whenever the foam started coming out of that kid's mouth, and it sounds graphic, but whenever that happened, I'm like, all right, we got to call it, because this is starting to look a little bit crazy in my opinion. But like I said, expect the unexpected. You never know what you're going to see, from 10-year-olds fighting to foam coming out of somebody's mouth. It was a wild night, I'm sure for you.
That was the only sour thing of the whole night. The ref should have called that way earlier than he did. And we both said that on the broadcast. You know, one thing I always, you know, committed to myself when I do broadcast is to tell the truth. And I mean, that starts here on this channel, is like, you know, I'm going to call it how I see it. And if sometimes people get upset by that, I'm okay with it. But
fair and balanced.
You know, the referee should have stopped that fight long before he stopped it. He let the young man, as you said, he was literally foaming at the mouth. Now, you know, it was just spit coming out of his mouth, but it looked really bad. But he was out for, and that's the other thing. He did fall eventually, and then the ref is letting it go for another 10 seconds, like waving his hand. It's like, no, the dude is sleeping. He's been sleeping for a long time. Stop the fight. You know, and if you're the kid, like, they tried to interview him afterwards. He couldn't even talk. His esophagus was just so crushed. His trachea was so crushed that he couldn't even speak. I mean, that's just a kind of a lower level mistake that he made. But one thing I do want to say about the promotion before we wrap the video is Ragin FC, for a regional promotion, put on a lot of very evenly matched fights. And up until that submission, that fight was extremely even. And every fight, you know, you usually go to, you know, local events and it's like, okay, well, who's in the red corner? Okay, there's all your winners for tonight. And it's really kind of sad. But Ragin FC did a good job. I mean, there was a lot of blue corner victories last night, probably 40%. And, you know, a lot of very close fights, a lot of stylistic good matchups, and skill level that was put on display that was even. And so I want to give Ragin FC a lot of credit for that. I had fun. They're doing another card in November. They said they'll probably have me back. Will definitely be back if life allows.
Yeah, the matchmaking was good, and then the streaming was also good, right? There's a lot of people in this world. We went from ESPN, and back before that was the Fox days. Now we're in the Paramount Plus era, but there's always issues with streaming, and I just have to say Clear Life Live, Clear Life Media did a good job, because from the streaming aspect on the computer, it was actually a pretty good, you know, show. They did everything you would want to see in a high level professional type of stream. So credit to them, credit to you guys. Congratulations on getting the debut. I can't wait to see the next one.
Thanks, man. Thank you guys for watching this episode. We sincerely appreciate it. As always, this will come out Sunday night. So if you're watching it Sunday night, come back Monday at 8 p.m. Central. Nick does Matchmaker Monday, the live stream that you all love and come to enjoy, where he breaks down every matchup on the main card from UFC Apex that took place. So it'll be Quillian Salkilld, Mateusz Gamrot, Yadier Del Valle. We know Darren Elkins is done, so he's not going to be on the list. But basically who he thinks each person, winner and loser, should face next. That's a really fun and interactive live stream that he spends about an hour and a half chatting with you guys, breaking down the matchups. Make sure you're there for that. And then Thursday evenings, myself and Moneyball MMA do our full card prediction and picks for UFC 330 this weekend. We'll start with the early prelims. We'll finish with Makhachev and Gary. And we hope to see you guys there. Until next time, have a great day.
Peace.